afternoon. Last week, we learned of the extraordinary opportunity for Canada to develop policies and messages, technologies and practices for harmonizing energy, the environment, and the economy. And in our earlier webinar, specifically about the People's Republic of China, we learned of the country's current circumstances and a bit on lifestyles. This webinar will focus on the way forward to optimum returns for Canadians from the People's Republic of China, as well as emerging for Western Canada throughout the Indo-Asia region, specifically in goods and services, technologies in the fields of agri-foods and energy. So I say welcome to the moderator, Gary. It's up to you now to carry on with your distinguished presenters. So over to you, Gary.
Thank you so much, Perry. It's a pleasure for me to be invited to moderate this session for you today. My name is Gary Marr. I'm the President and CEO of the Canada West Foundation, a very old public policy think tank focused on Western Canada. And we're going to go straight to quick introduction. Panelists. These are an extraordinary group of people that have been gathered in one place. And I think that we have until to complete this, and each one of them has a presentation. So without much ado, we'll get started. I'll start with the brief introductions. Consul General Lu from the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China, located here in the city of Calgary, will be our first presenter. Gordon Holden, who is the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, a very highly regarded institution, and Gordon with a phenomenal career in public service. John Jiang, he's the only one of the four panelists that I don't know particularly well, but just from a quick conversation, he knows a great deal about agri-food and agri-technologies. And finally, Jeff Kucharski, who I had the pleasure of working with for many years with the governor of Alberta, currently a professor at Royal Roads University and also a fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So we're going to go straight to Consul General Lu. And Consul General, I'll ask you to get your slides up and make your presentation. You have the floor, madam.
Perry and Gary for the introduction. And very nice to see you all again. So you can see my slide. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be invited again to the second episode of these virtual discussions. This time, we will focus on the export opportunities of Canadian agri-products and energy. As you know, China has a vast market to absorb high-end agri-products as well as energy, which Canada is abundant for. Taking energy as an example, China consumed 702 million tons of oil in 2020, of which 542 million tons were imported, representing a 77% dependency rate. During the same year, China consumed 325 billion cubic meters of natural gas, of which 141 billion cubic meters were from abroad, representing a 43% dependency rate. This trend is set to rise over the next 20 years. The Chinese market will undoubtedly provide unlimited opportunities for Canadian products. Being a business person, it is natural to think from a business perspective. However, if we take a look at the important lessons from the 50 years bilateral relations between China and Canada, it is easy to jump into a conclusion that business and trade exchanges are never running independently of sound political relations and favorable public opinion. Some said the returns of 3 M's was very helpful to get the strain between China and Canada relieved. I'm sure both Chinese and Canadian business communities would like to see the speedy restore of bilateral relations and an early resumption of close business cooperation. Unfortunately, we haven't yet seen a remarkable sign of a strong recovery. Although China-Canada bilateral trade had a good performance so far this year, it is far from satisfaction. It still lacks positive factors for a major step forward. So what's wrong? During the last episode, I mentioned some of the economic factors that can facilitate bilateral trade. For this time, I will touch upon the non-economic factors relating to the decisive and the dominant role played by the bilateral political relation and the public opinion. In my view, it is impossible to turn the business opportunities from the drawing board into a reality without addressing the negative aspects of these non-economic factors. What are these negative aspects for us to nail down? Let's start by looking at history for answers. In 1968, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau decided to establish diplomatic relations with China. His idea was finally realized in October 1970. In 2 years, Canada had tried 4 times to reach out to China, but got cold feet at the last minute. It was because either China was a communist country or the United States, the big boss, was interfering. The story tells us that although China has always been an economic opportunity, their ideological bias proves to be the biggest hurdle and requires great political wisdom and courage to cross. Furthermore, the big boss may not always be right, especially when the US later established diplomatic ties with China by following Canada's footsteps. In 1989, a collective sanction made by the West against China failed to last long and didn't stop China from continuous growing. Relations was restored soon after. In 2001, Prime Minister Jiang Kai-shek visited China with a delegation of over 600 people. It was the largest foreign mission at that time in Canadian history. The trip led to the signing of nearly 200 contracts and agreements. This story tells us that approach of weaponizing values of human rights and democracy was neither sustainable nor up to expectation. Conversely, quitting it resulted in win-win scenario. Furthermore, China didn't and will never bend itself to external pressure for economic benefits. In 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau prepared a free trade talk in his trip to China. This, if signed, would have certainly boosted bilateral economies and trade. For some reason, the FTA didn't survive the trip, but still got chances. However, the following incidents occurred, chilled the bilateral relationship, and no one dared to mention the FTA since then. To be worse, in the past 3 years, demonizing China became politically correct, thanks to repeated labeling China of exercising coercive diplomacy and arbitrary detention, and the non-stop pointing fingers at China on issues related to Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. Both Chinese and Canadians lost their favor to each other. Canadians were so awfully misled that only 14% held a positive view towards China. I'm sure not every one of you in this room would agree with whatever some politicians and the media claimed. The sad thing was that your voices were pretty weak and seldomly heard publicly. The story tells us that the long-term misinformation and misleading of public opinion eventually backfired and did hold back the better economic and trade opportunities. Having identified the negative aspects of the non-economic factors, we should be able to prescribe the following remedies in order to create positive environment to allow Canadian products successfully landing on the Chinese market. First, be realistic instead of playing ostrich. No matter whether you like it or not, China is now the world's second largest economy and is on track to be the biggest. China houses a huge market with considerable business potentials. After 100 years of hard work, China has found a right path that suits its way of development and realization of national rejuvenation. China has made significant achievements, including eliminating the century-old problem of absolute poverty. The secret code of China's success is upholding the leadership of the Communist Party and its existing political system, of which China will never abandon. The Western world has always had to deal with the Communist China in the past, present, and future. China's success has debunked not only the passé narrative of the rising power will seek hegemony, but also the current assertion of China's threat. A country can absolutely achieve prosperity without sacrificing the interests of others. Instead, it is entirely possible for this country to turn its strength into a positive factor that benefits the whole world. I have to point out that this is the most fundamental distinction between China and the US. At a time when COVID-19 keeps evolving and the global economic recovery remains sluggish, global issues like the absence of growth momentum, lagging in proper governance, and imbalanced development require joint efforts of all, including China and Canada, to find the right solution. President Xi Jinping's idea of a community of shared future for mankind is a cure for many of the problems. China believes a peaceful and harmonious bilateral relationship between two countries will make both winners, while a confrontational one will make both losers. I found that many people working in key sectors of the governments and industries in Canada are short of both the knowledge about China and the willingness to learn about China. Is it because they see no need to learn or resist to learn? I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that burying their heads in the sand and pretending nothing has happened and will happen will definitely lead to the loss of the business opportunities in that huge cross-ocean market. Second, be inclusive instead of whistling into the wind. During the Cold War, the Chinese and Canadian leaders overcame impossible odds and made the historical steps to establish diplomatic ties. This visionary move brought about a long-term friendship and a tangible welfare for both peoples. History once again proved that countries with different social systems are able to coexist and interact peacefully as long as they adhere to mutual respect and equality. We have done so many times over the past 50 years, and we can do the same today, and we should do it even better. There is an old Chinese saying that is full of wisdom. Good relations are conducive to business success. China never imposes the political system and values by its own standard on others as a precondition for economic cooperation. China grows by practicing self-improvement instead of bullying. Regarding democracy, human rights, and other issues, China believes there is no single criterion and no outlier is quite qualified to have the final say. China carries out the whole process of people's democracy, and only the Chinese people are qualified to make a judgment on its own government. As for the differences, China believes in-depth exchanges are better than attacking and suppressing. Just like meat lovers and vegetarians hold different values, it doesn't mean they need to label each other as evil or even provoke gang fights. When the US grouped countries into democratic and authoritarian categories in order to tackle China, it will only lead to the worldwide division and confrontation rather than China's submission. Third, be independent instead of subjecting to the mighty. A good government should be safeguarding the interests of its own people and never allowing anyone else to sit in the driver's seat. The independent in foreign policy was once exemplified by Canada's decision to establish diplomatic relations with China against all interference. That decision is still inspiring to this day. According to the data released by Australia-China Relations Institute, of the University of Sydney. In the first 9 months of 2021, the value of Australian exports to China fell by 17 billion Australian dollars. At the same time, the US, as Canberra's partner, was quick to take over most of the Australian business in China, with the value of US exports of the same commodities to China increased by 4.6 billion US dollars, making the US the biggest beneficiary of Australia's trade dispute with China. This was a fresh lesson of be careful who you follow. If you follow your big boss blindly, you are destined to suffer. In recent years, the US disrupted the world supply chain in its awareness that COVID-19 was doomed to worsen the situation. Now the Americans seem to fail to take advantages of the mess, and its allies suffered even more. In the future, China will be committed to the higher levels of opening up. Whether Canada can seize business opportunities and expand its export to China depends on its own critical analysis, good judgment, and independent decision-making. Fourth, be mentor-like instead of flowing with the so-called public opinion. I believe some politicians and media cannot represent the whole public opinion. However, it is ridiculous to see the Canadian public opinion has long been kidnapped by a few anti-China experts. There are many Canadians like you who not only desire but also take actions to contribute to China-Canadian economic and trade cooperation. Your views should have been part of Canadians' mainstream public opinion. You were blessed with more knowledge about China through your long-term engagement in economic and trade interactions with China. You are well positioned to promote bilateral relations and to inspire and educate more Canadians and even more Canadian politicians about China. Please get your voices heard through multiple channels. Be creative about the way you convey your messages. There are so many things you can do to help beef up trust, on which mutual understanding is essential. Only when the stage of mutual understanding and trust is all set will business opportunities flood in uninvited. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Consul General, saying how impressive your presentation was. I'm going to restrict myself to one question, even though there's many things that I could ask you. And the question is this: is there a role for Canada to be a bridge between the number one and number two largest economies in the world? Are there things that Canada can do to help facilitate a better understanding and a better relationship between these two global superpowers?
Well, very good questions. I think Canada indeed can play a very important role or play a bridge between the two big countries. I won't call my China superpower because only it is the second largest economic country, but we are still developing country. Indeed, when we look at the history, that when the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau decided to establish diplomatic ties with China, I think it's kind of a hint. It was a hint to US that if you didn't follow Canada's steps, you will be lagging behind the trend of the world. So you see if the Canada can make an independent decision in many issues concerning the global economy or global or world countries' relations, it can and indeed will play a very important bridge between not only between China and the US, can be between China and many countries, I believe.